So let's talk for a moment about filling the wood. After I put on a wash coat on the entire guitar, I'm going to fill. In this case, the only thing I have to fill is the headstock veneer. And the traditional way that we fill is using pumice in French polishing. Now, I put on the spit coat, so there's a little bit of shellac on the veneer. And then what I'm going to do is I use my olive oil and I use pumice. This is what's called a ponce bag, basically, I made. Put some pumice in some linen, tied it up. Then when the pumice comes out as a powder. It's kind of cool. So I put some pumice down on my paper towel, and then I am going to grab my fad, which has already been used. It's big. I'm going to attempt to put, without spilling, some olive oil in the pumice. Some people put the pumice directly on the wood. Some people just mix the pumice with the olive oil. I'm going to do that. I'm trying to do too many things with two hands. And I'm going to put the pumice and do a cross grain motion, driving the pumice into the grain. I can also, if I wanted to, just directly put pumice. I am not using shellac at this point, you'll notice, because there was a spit coat of shellac on the veneer. And so by using an abrasive like pumice, I'm driving in a combination of shellac dust, pumice, the oil, and I have to do this a few times. This is going to dry and it will shrink. The grain has not all been filled, but we've got to start. And by the time I've done this probably a few times, the grain will be mostly filled. I really don't like to go over it when it's wet, because then there's a tendency to pull the pumice out. But just to demonstrate again, I like to use plenty of oil. And the grain is beginning to fill. Contrary to what I just did, you try not to go over a place where you've already done it, because then you can pull out the pumice. So when this dries, I'll coat it again. And as I say, hopefully in 2 or 3 coats, I've done it. One of the reasons we use a lot of oil, and sometimes do the oil right on the paper towel, is to what Eugene Clark called clearing the pumice. Means mixing it up with enough oil so that you don't end up getting a piece of pumice stuck in the grain and and showing once you put shellac on top of it. That can be an annoyance. Suddenly you've got a couple of flecks of pumice that show, and you've got to take the shellac off at that point and sort of start again. Add that the danger of using shellac at this step is shellac really wants to build and build quickly. So if you use shellac in this step, or very much shellac, the shellac will tend to want to build into the grain, and now you can't fill it, or it's at least more difficult to fill. So we got taught that you should use little or no shellac, that the shellac that was actually on the wood from the spit coat is enough. So that's the reason I'm using the oil alone, because I've already got shellac on the wood, and the combination of the shellac dust that is abraded by the pumice plus the oil is what does the job. Let's look and see how our filling did. It's the next morning, and I'd say we filled about maybe up to 3/4. There are still pores there, but they are a lot less than they were. So we're going to once again take our fad with olive oil and pumice and drive some more filling into it. My guess is that I'm going to need a third coating easily, and maybe a fourth. At that point, you may have a pore or two that still remains, but that'll fill with the shellac once we're actually polishing the veneer. Where it gets tricky for me, and I'm not an expert, is that you get about 3/4 or 80% filled, but you still have a little bit of pore. And you're in the old days, they used to use things like sandarac and other retardants so that the shellac would not fill up the pores. It would retard the building process, the build process. So that's why at this point we use olive oil with, whatever shellac is still, of course, on the pad or on the surface of the wood.